Welcome to this episode of The Journey with me, Shaina NC. Today we have in our midst somebody who I look up to, respect and admire, Pinaki Misra. It's rare to find somebody who is respected as a politician and is renowned as a lawyer. In fact, it's difficult to remark whether he is a better politician or a smarter lawyer. All his friends agree that he is equally comfortable in both profiles. He is also an avid traveler and amongst those few political figures who have friends across all parties and all ideologies. Let's engage with him in the journey and find out what are his views on 75 years of India's independence. Pinaki Misra ji, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. And let me tell you straight away, I'm equally an admirer of yours, if not more.
Thank you so much.
For the manner in which you come across, on your in your TV shows, always balanced, always temperate, always graceful.
Maybe I should have been a lawyer. I'd be competing with you.
Well, actually, there should be more women politicians like you.
Thank you so much. So, Pinaki ji, let's start with your journey. You win Puri seat. It's a historic victory, but it's something which comes naturally to you because Orissa is your home state. What is this journey of yours that gets a young lawyer who's done so well for himself in the Supreme Court to spend so much time in active politics?
Politics really is my passion. It's not my vocation or my profession. I am very happy to be a lawyer professionally. I've been blessed with some, I guess, natural instinct which makes me a reasonably good lawyer. And I really therefore love being in court, particularly as an arguing counsel and as a senior counsel. I get to argue a whole gamut of cases spanning across an incredible variety of subjects. But politics has always been a passion. You know, when I was a child, my father was in Parliament, but he was always in the Rajya Sabha. He was never in the Lok Sabha.
3 times.
And like your father, he was part of the Swatantra Party of those days.
Back in the day.
Which was Congress's principal opposition party, actually.
Yes.
So I spent a lot of time in Parliament when I was a child. You know, in those days you could just breeze in and breeze out. There was no security, none of these trappings. Mrs. Gandhi, the then senior Mrs. Indira Gandhi, was very kind to me. She used to let me have the run of the ice cream counters in Parliament.
So that must have been more an attraction than Parliament.
So it was a great attraction, and it was always very attractive to go into the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha galleries and hear speeches. So my father was in Rajya Sabha. Normally I had been in the Rajya Sabha gallery, a visitors gallery. So it was a wonderfully rewarding experience as a child, and it just seems the natural sequitur that I would want to fight elections.
There's a natural progression.
And just very natural progression. So the earliest chance I got, I was then of course in 1996 when I was in my mid-30s. I then fought my first Lok Sabha election and won from Puri. That was my first election. I lost then in 98 when the Biju Janata Dal and the BJP were together.
And you had a little flirtation with Congress.
That was I was actually then as a Congress MP.
Yes.
Late J.B. Patnaik, who was then the very towering Congress leader in Orissa.
Yes.
He sort of helmed me through the Congress party then. You know, I'd always known Mr. Naveen Patnaik socially. And, then at some point, I think, as often happens in the Congress, Mr. Naveen Patnaik, who I'd known socially, was a very warm, wonderful politician, very wonderful human being. He was very kind. He gave me a place in the Biju Janata Dal. He gave me the ticket from Puri, and then since then, thrice back to back with 2009, 2014 and 19, I've been privileged to serve the Biju Janata Dal as a member of Parliament from Puri.
I think what is most remarkable is that you've stood your own despite the Modi wave.
He's just been the most extraordinary leader that this country has seen. 5 times Chief Minister now. In China, I think he's going to be a 6th term Chief Minister. I dare say today with a great deal of confidence that he's going to be a 6th term Chief Minister.
So that's history, isn't it?
He's going to be history. He's already crossed Jyoti Basuji as the longest serving Chief Minister of a large state. And I think once he comes into his 6th term, he will then, I think, also go past Mr. Gegong Apang, who used to be Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, which is a relatively smaller state, to be the longest serving Chief Minister in the country.
But then I have a counter question. I mean, it's great that you've been in power for so long, you've had the opportunity to serve, but look at the index, the social index on all fronts in Orissa. Unfortunately, way behind the rest of the country, and it's not as if you have seen tremendous progress on all counts. Why do you say? Is that lack of political will? Is that lack of an agenda or a vision plan, or just basic lack of development?
Modi ji always says that the east of India has never developed at the same pace as the west of India has. That's one of his very, sort of favorite bugbears, as it were, about India's progress. And therefore, it's always, I think he's wanted to somehow pull up East India to be at par with West India. He's often talked about it. These are legacy issues. But I don't know when you last went to Orissa. You will find an extraordinary change has come about from the stories of the mid-90s when the Kalahandi children were for sale, mango kernel was being eaten, etc., etc. All those typical
but
shibboleths.
Those are typical stories that one hears about in the media.
Shibboleths about Orissa. Orissa
what
today is
about
a totally
employment?
different. It's a totally different ball game today. It's a highly industrialized state. It has become now virtually the grain basket of India, in the sense of, we are one of the largest producers of rice. We are exporting rice now. It's always been very naturally endowed, iron ore, manganese, bauxite, you name it, and therefore we've always had heavy industries there. All the top industrial houses have huge presence there. That unfortunately has led to pockets of great affluence without it percolating down. And what Mr. Naveen Patnaik has now done is that he has ensured that there is a social security umbrella which has given nutrition, which has given education, and therefore the average Odia boy or girl today
can be aspirational.
Is now aspirational, is at par with the average Indian anywhere else in any of the, your Maharashtra or Gujarat or Punjab or Haryana. And that's what's been Mr. Naveen Patnaik's greatest, I think, contribution to Orissa. And the people, recognize that, and which is why they keep voting him back to power. Everybody keeps wondering, what is his magic? Magic is simply the hard work he's putting in,
the connect with
in the nuts and bolts of the creation of a great fabric, social, political, every which way. That fabric is such a strong, interwoven fabric that that's what's really his greatest asset.
Let's talk a little bit about your constituency. I don't know whether it's correct to say, but the star attraction is obviously the Jagannath Puri.
No question.
I mean,
we always jokingly say that's the biggest steel plant of Orissa.
Yeah.
Because it's the greatest employment generator.
Right.
It's the greatest attraction.
Yes.
Crores of people come there. You must come once. Rath Yatra is around the corner. You must come once.
Definitely.
For Rath Yatra, and you will realize the pomp and the pageantry and the magnificence of, of India, which is reflected there. And so secular. Let me tell you, Shaina, the God's chariot actually stops about 100 yards into its march at the home, the legendary home of somebody called General Salbeg, who was a Muslim general, who was supposed to be his greatest devotee, so that his family members can come out and do special darshan on the road. So
unity in diversity.
Huge unity in diversity, microcosm of everything that's so good about India after 75 years.
But you've also championed many heritage precincts and causes which you believe are imperative also in your constituency. When it comes to restoration of these old precincts which sometimes go unnoticed, how do you think you can use Parliament as a medium to get it into the main field?
Mainly by flagging issues in Parliament, which then come to the notice of the Culture Department, come to the notice of the Tourism Department. So that's been one of the ways we've done it. But also, I think Mr. Naveen Patnaik himself, he's a great aesthete. He's written books with Jacqueline Kennedy.
Yes.
He's co-authored them with Jacqueline Kennedy on books on plants, on ancient architecture, on the temples and the palaces in Rajasthan, etc. So he's a great aesthete, and it's always been he's one of the great Lord Jagannath's greatest bhakts, let me tell you. So it's been his greatest dream that this should become such a magnificent heritage structure, and the corridor around it should become so wonderful that it should be world famous, that people who come there want to come back there again and again and again. That's the idea.
75 years into India's democracy, we've had many a contribution, lots of political leaders, lots of different dispensations, different ideologies. But the one thing that stays intact is the process of parliament and the process of communicating the good work that you are doing in individual constituencies to the country. I'd like to ask you, what do you think has been your contribution in parliament in these years?
Principally, it's to flag not just issues with regard to Puri, but I've had to play a much wider role in terms of, also showcasing a lot of Odisha's problems in Delhi.
Such as?
Such as our issues with the mining policies, for instance, because that's our bread and butter. The maximum amount of revenue, Shaina, we generate from Odisha is out of mining. And, touchwood, we've exploited the mining industry very, very cautiously, keeping
the environment
in view, keeping the intergenerational equity situation in view, that we leave enough behind for our children and our grandchildren,
generations to come.
Generations to come, so that the intergenerational equity doesn't get imbalanced. But because of a very carefully calibrated way of exploitation, I think Odisha has done well with its revenue stream, and but that's always needed central help. And I have to say that the last 8 years now, you just finished 8 years of BJP rule. Odisha has always been in partnership. We fight very bitterly at the ground level between political parties as opposition should. But both, I think, Mr. Modi and Mr. Patnaik have this philosophy which they hold in common, which is that once elections are over, then we work together in partnership for the state and for the country. So whatever is
both
good,
are great leaders and both think of national interest.
Shaina, whatever is good for the country, BJD has always supported the BJP. We've criticized the BJP when we felt that some things ought to be.
So give me an example of a couple of issues which the BJD has supported the current dispensation and believing that this is part of democracy's vibrancy.
Look, on Article 370, for instance,
Yeah.
we were one of the first voices which came out saying that this is laudable. When demonetization happened, the manner in which the Prime Minister showcased it, that these are his objectives, the Chief Minister thought that this was absolutely in order.
The right thing to do.
The mining, auction policy, very important. In India, the auction policy that is now been partnered between the central government and the state, which Mr. Modi himself, I think, complimented the Chief Minister on the floor of the House. That's again been in partnership. But there have been issues on which we've held our own. I'll tell you, quite frankly, on the farmers issue, for instance, the Chief Minister was of the view that if there is so much opposition and resistance.
But there you have to give it to the Prime Minister. He showed statesmanly like qualities and withdrew and
so the
did
Chief
it in
Minister was the
national
first
interest.
person who complimented him again, saying that this is a perfect example of a visionary leader who doesn't stand on prestige and on ego. And I'm sure there'll be a second and third innings when you can actually showcase and perhaps iron out some of the creases. There must be some creases, which is why there was so much opposition, or there must have been a lack of communication, perhaps adequate communication. I'm sure once that's over, we'll come out with all the better.
And in the days to come, especially post the Amrit Mahotsav and the 75 years of India's independence, what are the issues you think we as a country really need to focus on collectively? You can be a legitimate voice of dissent in Parliament, you can choose to support where you choose to, but what are those issues that are really close to your heart and your party's heart?
We need to somehow redress the inequalities that exist, not just in terms of economics and finances, but also in terms of the social disparities that continue to unfortunately bedevil us. Nobody can deny that. Even today, large pockets of India.
But it's quite idealistic to say that you'd want to resolve this issue, because this is not an issue that can be resolved. You can just make sure the per capita income of every Indian citizen increases.
I think when I say resolved, I mean at least ensure that the chasm doesn't get wider, gets narrower. That's the idea. Don't make things worse. Let's try and make things as better as possible. So there is nothing can ever be perfect, but let good not be eclipsed by a perfect which doesn't happen. That's the idea.
But surely somebody who's as educated and as well-read as yourself does realize that in the past you've had dispensations that only gave freebies, subsidies, SOPs. That is not the solution. The solution is to make every Indian Atmanirbhar, to have the certain kind of education, security, financial empowerment as a roadmap ahead.
Look, there is no doubt that there are legacy issues of 70 years which bedevil us today. A lot of course correction will be required in order to ensure that the lack of education and the lack of employment opportunities, for instance, that's really very, very serious today.
Yeah.
That a lot of work will have to go into that to ensure that those imbalances are corrected. Our Prime Minister is the first one to recognize that. Let's face it. He's I have no doubt that he's well-meaning when he is very concerned about employment issues. He's concerned about social and economic disparities. And I think the thing to do is the federal cooperation that he's talked about. That's something that we need to really, because the states have to be taken as equal partners in this journey.
Yeah.
I
think that's an endeavor that everyone is focusing on.
The problem is, I think the Prime Minister's vision is correct. I'm not sure that everybody around him shares his vision, with the greatest respect. So I think perhaps he needs to, explain to a lot of people around him that this partnership with the states, because he's been a chief minister himself. Remember,
so he realizes
so he really
works.
knows, having been there for 12 years as chief minister or 14 years as chief minister, I think he knows how important it is to take the states on board, which is why he always does that. But everybody around him perhaps is not as anxious to take the states along. They feel that they may be able to go a little further ahead without the states and to sort of try and discredit some of the states. I find that's a little bit of a anachronism, dichotomy that happens in the BJP.
You command a lot of respect because you have an equally stunning legal profession. How do you juggle both?
That's a painful nerve you've pinched now.
Is that?
Because it just means that I basically get no holiday in life.
And you'd love that holiday because you love traveling.
If Parliament is, if Parliament is in session, I'm there. If Parliament is not in session, I'm in court or I'm in my constituency. So I essentially get no time off. Once courts close, I rush back to the constituency. Once courts reopen, I'm back in court working. So yeah, that's been one of the great, I think, laments of my life, that I've managed to actually, there's so much on the bucket list I still have, I feel I ought to be able to do. Yeah. There are so many parts of this wonderful world that, one hasn't managed to reach out and see, but there's so little time. So I guess, as age catches up, occasionally one gets that tinge of regret more and more. So in the Lok Sabha, it's been very rare that
to have a Lok Sabha
full-fledged
lawyer politician combination.
But that's something that I'm not willing to give up, because again, it's very
absolutely, and
dear
that's
to my
your
heart.
route, to be honest and to stay upright
also,
and be a man of integrity.
Also, Shaina, it helps me, not take anything from politics.
Yes,
that's the biggest thing, advantage. I think the biggest advantage really I have in politics,
that you can use politics as a medium to give,
or and not have to take anything from politics.
Or as our Prime Minister uses a word often, to be a Pradhan Sevak.
True, but that's, you can only be a Pradhan Sevak if you're like him, who has no family, who's got no needs, or like my chief minister, or like my chief minister. But when people like us, who have families to feed and who have like to lead reasonably decent lives, I think we need to have a source of income as well, and I think law helps.
So I have a question, and this is a question very close to my heart, because publicly I have said on many a forum that I applaud parties like yours, where Mr. Naveen Patnaik has given 33% tickets to women, opportunities to women parliamentarians. As a male parliamentarian, why don't you champion the cause of women's reservation?
I have done so unabashedly and unceasingly and vigorously. Let me tell you, every time, every parliament session, in some context or the other, I say the time has come for women's reservation bill to go through, and my chief minister makes it a point to ask that when did you raise this and what was the response, because he's really genuinely feels for this. He sent the youngest, young girl at
Yes,
26 is a member of
26-year-old.
parliament. We sent Pramila Bisoi, who's one of the Mission Shakti ladies,
Yes.
From Ganjam district. She's a member of parliament. He's picked women from all diaspora. Any man can do it now. This Prime Minister can, because he has both the majority that he commands, as also the ability, I think, to bulldoze any opposition that there may be there, and there is some opposition, let me tell you, in North India particularly, to bulldoze that opposition completely and say, sorry, this is an idea whose time has come and it cannot be halted anymore. If the BJP and the Congress get together with parties like us backing it, this will go through without a debate. I've always said that. There is not even a cause for debate anymore. What is the debate?
If you can have a triple talaq, a 370 with such ease, I'm sure this will not take that much.
Yes, I completely agree, and it's an idea which really must, 24 election must be on the basis of women's reservation.
You specialize in company laws and environmental laws. Do you think there is many a challenge when it comes to the environment that we as a country are not understanding?
But, we as a country now have begun to understand environment law. Honestly, 70 years, environment in India has been degraded and practically raped, Shaina, I'll be honest with you. And industry is in large measure, not just large measure, probably in a absolutely preponderant measure, industry is to blame for it. I squarely blame them. And our public officials, all our pollution control,
corruption in the past,
pollution control boards, etc. It's been a vice den of corruption. It's only now that we are becoming aware of what we have done to ourselves, and particularly in the lockdown, if you saw the beauty of nature that suddenly emerged, because man, which is so vile, had disappeared. I think we are now coming to terms with the fact that global warming, etc., how badly it affects us. And I'm glad that the Prime Minister also has really taken this very seriously, because he has to lead from the front to arrest this damage which has happened, all thanks to greed.
But it is a public-private partnership too. There are lots of NGOs. Sadhguru has taken on this cause of soil conservation, many others who are doing their own bit too. But legislation is the most important.
It's very important. We have the right legislation in place, I think.
Enacting it.
I think also the execution is now improving without doubt. The pollution control boards, etc., are now coming to terms with the fact that this life as usual must stop now. But yes, a lot of damage has happened, and it could have been so easily avoided. But that's not just India; it's all over the world.
All over the world. So we're coming to the end of our show, and I know that you are an avid music lover. You love reading your books. You like to travel. You like the good things in life. When you're not in Parliament and when you're not in court arguing the most difficult cases, what is Pinaki Mishra doing? You're right. I'm a great movie buff. I have to say I'm a avid Hollywood movie buff, not so much not so much contemporary Indian cinema. Okay. I love old Indian cinema, my time, my generation Indian cinema, my generation Indian music, particularly classical music, because my mother was a very noted classical singer. I've spent all my life in the lap of singers like Girja Devi ji, who was my mother's guru. Pandit Shanta Prasad ji, Ali Akbar Khan Sahab. We've spent a lot of time in my childhood all the classical greats. So I love Indian classical music as well, both vocal as well as instrumental. I love art. I love old masters. I have a reasonably nice collection of old masters. I'm sure if you have good taste, you have good art. So thank you very much, Pinaki Mishra ji. I think it's been a great journey, a great learning to know that you are not just a competent lawyer, but a very accomplished politician, and a politician who believes that passion comes first and profession can follow later.
It's been a great pleasure being on your show.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
So that was Pinaki Mishra from the Biju Janata Dal, representing the Lok Sabha constituency of Puri. I'd like to end with what Raja Ram Mohan Roy said. Truth and virtue do not necessarily belong to wealth and power and distinctions of big mansions. It can be a person who creates the future of all of us. So until then, let's all remain united, march forward with all humility, and as Sardar Patel said, fully awake to the situation we face, demanding our rights and firmness for this great nation of ours called Bharat. Thank you all for joining me in the journey. This is me, Shaina NC, signing off for Doordarshan. Next week, we will have one more parliamentarian and listen to his or her story.